Hello and welcome to this episode of the Industrial Engineering Notebook. Today's topic is manufacturing systems. These seem like big words at first, but they're not so bad. We're just going to be asking the question, what are the different kinds of factories? And we're going to see that there are 5 general kinds of factories, and volume and variety really determine which category a factory will fall into. There is a trade-off relationship between volume and variety. If you set your factory up to make something in large amounts, you won't be able to make as many different kinds of that thing. But if you set up your factory to make lots of different kinds of a thing, it's going to be hard to make a lot of any of those kinds. And really there's a spectrum that you can fall on between high volume and low variety and high variety. So on this end we'll have our high volume, low variety, and at the bottom here we'll have low volume, high variety. The first manufacturing system is a continuous process system. The easiest example for this would be like an oil refinery or maybe some plant that produces some special kind of chemical or soap, and it literally flows through the factory, through pipes or whatever, and the operations that you do might be increasing the temperature or changing the pressure or changing the volume or adding another kind of chemical, and that kind of just happens as the fluid flows through the pipes in this factory. And you can get really high volumes out of this as long as you're pushing fluid through those pipes, but it's really low variety because it's set up for a very specific set of conditions, this specific temperature at this specific pressure, which only works for one kind of fluid. So continuous process is good if you want lots of volume and really low variety. If we decrease the volume and increase the variety a little bit, we'll end up in an assembly line. This is a nice linear process. We have one operation, then the next operation, and then the next, and so on. So your raw material will go in here, and then this operator makes a change, and then this operator makes a change, and keeps going until you have your finished product on the other end. And you can get really high volumes because everyone just has to focus on one task. But it's really low variety because this one task only contributes to a very small set of products on the other end. But if we decrease our volume again and increase our variety, we're going to end up at a linked cell system. And I'm going to draw that up here. So these are little cells here, and then each cell is kind of like a mini assembly line and it doesn't have to be the same number of operations. It really just depends on what that mini assembly line or that cell is trying to do. And you get something that looks like this. And there's an input and an output for each of these cells. Now what comes out of one cell might just be a sub-assembly of what needs to go into another cell, or maybe it's just making one kind of product. These really are mini assembly lines that feed somewhere else in the factory or that just go straight out the door. And this way you get more variety, but you're sacrificing some volume. Next category, if we want to decrease volume again and increase our variety, is a job shop. Job shops can get really complicated really quick. You have an operation here, an operation there, an operation back here. And once the product completes at one operation, it can go to several different. And that's because you're not making just one kind of product, you're making many kinds of products. And these machines are really versatile. And the way I drew this makes it seem like there is a kind of general flow this direction with the job shop. But in reality, it's much more complicated and you have arrows pointing inwards and all around. But that's because you have a high diversity of products that go through here. So it might need this machine here, and then it might need to come up to this machine and then some work its way around and kind of loop all around. So naturally, you sacrifice some volume, but you can get a really, really high variety with this kind of system. For example, let's say a farmer's got a tank in a field and it's a very weirdly shaped tank, but it needs to be shaped in that weird way. I don't know, you come up with a story behind this tank in this farmer's field, but let's say the farmer only needs to replace it once every 10 years. It wouldn't make sense to have a high volume kind of factory for that product because you don't need a high volume. You don't need a high number of those things. You need a low number of those things, but you need the business to be sustainable in between those 10 years. You still need to be making money. So what you do is you don't just make that one tank, you make all kinds of weird different products with your versatile machines to stay profitable. So here, your profit is really coming from the high variety, whereas here, your profit was coming from the high volume. And the category with the lowest volume and the highest variety is a construction site. And this is pretty self-explanatory. If you want to make a building, you probably don't need to make 50,000 of them, right? You probably just need to make one, and it probably looks a lot different than every other building that's ever been built. The other kind of quality of construction sites is you can't build it in a different place than it needs to be used. So like your coffee mug did not need to be made in your home, in your cabinet, right? It could be constructed somewhere else entirely and just shipped to you, but construction sites are often for products that are so large that you cannot just mail it, right? You can't just mail a skyscraper to New York when it's done. So these are our different categories. Up here you have high volume, low variety. Your profit really comes from the high volume. And down here we have low volume and high variety, and your profit really comes from that high variety. Often factories will kind of fall in a sort of spectrum between these, but to make decisions well for your factory, it's a good idea to understand where on this spectrum you fall. If you liked this video, hit the like button, please, and thank you. If you want to see more of these, you should let me know, and you should do that by hitting the subscribe button. And if you have questions, please put them in the comments, and I will try to answer them. You can't just mail a